Is here to talk about his recent book. Lud, it's so wonderful to have you on.
Thank you very much.
And you even brought us gifts. We have our own copies of this amazing book
That's
right here.
It's good for insomnia.
No, actually, this is very interesting to me, and I'm so glad that you're on the show today to tell us a little more about it. But first, Lud, I know our viewers would love to know a little bit more about you, so tell us about your background.
I am a pathologist physician, practice mainly in New York City and in Youngstown, Ohio, and my wife and I retired to Tucson in 2000.
So then what led you to want to write a book specifically about America's First Ladies?
Well, I was very interested when I was practicing in both politics and history, and retiring at 2000, you know the old adage, I married you for better or for worse, but not for lunch. So I had to do something. So I continued my interest in these subjects by getting a master's degree at the U of A, and I wrote my first book, which was The White House Physician, and that carried over to the health of the First Ladies.
So this is your second book.
Yes, it is.
So let's really kind of talk about some of the diseases and even ailments that you discovered that some of the First Ladies had suffered from.
Well, in the early days, as was the history and what occurred in America, they had many infectious diseases that American citizens had. Antibiotics didn't come in until after 1930 and 1940. So if you go back to some of the really infectious diseases like tuberculosis, at least one lady died in the White House from tuberculosis. Malaria. You don't hear much about malaria nowadays, but at least 4 first ladies had malaria. And the reason they developed malaria is that they were in environments where there were mosquitoes that carried malaria. For instance, Abigail Adams, the second first lady, she always lived in cold, frigid New England, but when her husband, John Adams, became the first vice president of the United States, with the capital being in New York City, which had a lot of swamps, she developed malaria in New York City. And several other first ladies developed malaria during the fetid, unhealthy summers in Washington, D.C. There used to be a brook that ran right past the White House that bred mosquitoes. So if their husbands worked hard and stayed in humid Washington, D.C. during the summer, like Mrs. Polk, James K. Polk, he was a hard worker, and she developed malaria, as he did.
So do you think that maybe being the first lady may have resulted in some of these diseases, because they had to travel, or maybe even the stress?
That's one instance. Going back to what you said about diseases, another disease, and I shouldn't say disease, the consequences of pregnancy until the early 1900s could be quite severe. There were a number of first ladies who developed diseases subsequent to pregnancy, such as kidney disease, stroke, and that sort of thing. So probably one of the first ladies, who was pregnant 7 times, developed hypertension, probably related to pregnancy, and she died in office, the first lady who died in office.
Well, Lud, I have to ask, do you have any favorite first ladies that you've written about?
I do.
I had a feeling you might.
Yeah.
Can I mention 2?
Of course.
Betty Ford. Betty Ford, she had a husband, Jerry Ford, a very nice man, convivial man, but he was a politician. He was never home. So Betty Ford became depressed and she started drinking. In addition, she had osteoarthritis of the neck, severe shoulder and arm pain, and got hooked on analgesics, on drugs.
And we know, of course, she has the Betty Ford Clinic that lives on.
That's right, and but when she developed breast cancer, she told her husband, I want it all out there. So it was all out there, and because of that, so many people, so many young women went to physicians to be examined for breast cancer. Number 1. Number 2, a woman that you're probably not very familiar with, it would be Louise Adams, Louise Caroline Adams, the wife of John Quincy Adams. Very smart, married in London, one of the two first ladies that got married out of the country. Married in London, and John Quincy Adams was a terrific ambassador, but not a great husband. She was pregnant 12 times.
Wow.
And got depressed, wrote a couple of books that are only published posthumously.
Well, Lud, you definitely know your stuff. You know, you've done your research. And like you said, you've married your love of politics and medicine in this wonderful
I married
book.
my wife. That's my love. 50 years. So.
Good answer. Smart man. You're a smart man, Lud. But, you know, I'm going to let everybody know where they can get their hands on this book. And we want to thank you so much for joining us.
Amazon.com. BarnesandNobles.com. There's also an ebook edition, which is much cheaper.
Great.
And I know you also have your website, which we've actually seen a couple of times during this interview.
Thank you.
So
Yes.
to remind everybody, you can find out more about Lud's book, The Health of the First Ladies, on his website, firstladiesofamerica.com.